Okay, usually when I'm starting out a new campaign, what I'm trying to accomplish is taking a campaign just like it would be in vanilla and then adding a little bit of extra flavor and in particular a little bit of extra challenge to it. And a few days ago I was pretty successful at it when I used the Old World Campaign mod and I played a minor Skaven faction down somewhere around Warhammer Gibraltar area on that map, and I felt like that was a pretty good example to try to strive for again. But the downside to the Old World Campaign mod is that the interns are just extraordinarily long. So what I was hoping to do with this campaign was to sort of recreate a similar type of a feel, a similar type of a challenge, but without the really long interns. And it started out looking like it was going to be that way. So of course, as usual, I jump into this campaign with legendary very hard, maximum AI stats, and like I said, this is on the Immortal Empires expanded map. And I'll go ahead and mention a few of the other mods that I'm using in this particular campaign. What I was hoping to do is to give you guys an example of something that you could maybe try yourselves. And if I were to do this all over again, there's a couple of additional mods that I would recommend, which I'll get to in just a second. But the ones that I am using that I think are worth mentioning here, I'm using landmarks and heroes of legend, just like I did in that old one. I'm using the slower expansion and settlement supply lines mod, just like I did in that one. I'm using War of Attrition, which reduces the replenishment rates. And I'm using tougher siege tweaks because I find it pretty hard to live without that one now that I've started using it. And I'm using more sensical public order because we want the public order to be meaningful, unlike how it is in vanilla. And I don't personally care for the self-correcting mechanism in vanilla. And then finally, one other thing that I'm going to mention here, I am also using the chose improved garrisons, which should make it a little bit harder to expand because the garrisons are going to be stronger. One of the mods that we are using that I want to point out is the heraldry flags and banners mod, which is normally quite beautiful, and it still is, but this is the first chink in the armor of that particular mod. It looks to me like maybe it's off center or something, but for many of these additional like minor factions out here that the Immortal Empires Expanded mod adds to the game, yeah, the emblem is kind of cut in half here on the flag. So I don't know whether that's something that can be easily fixed or not, but I did want to go ahead and point that out. It's not so bad that it makes me want to stop using that mod, of course, but it is something that I at least wanted to point out here. Now, what I thought was going to be pretty nice about this campaign when I first started it, as you can see, I just started out with the Corsairs of Spite here, which is a minor Dark Elf faction, and what was immediately catching my eye is that you start out with a couple of regions here, and not only are your starting regions, but everything all around you is all bad climate for you. So I don't actually know how to feel about this. I'm not generally a fan of having a faction that starts out in a climate that they're not good at. And then if you have really nowhere to expand to, that kind of it introduces some extra challenge, yeah, but it also, takes a little bit of the dopamine hit out of expansion out of it. So probably were I to do this all over again, I would recommend also using the climate adaptation mod, which at least gives you the opportunity over time to terraform your settlements to make them a better climate. The other thing that I would recommend that I didn't use in this playthrough that I wish I would have would be a more aggressive AI mod like maybe Hecleus AI. Not the Hecleus Grand Strategy, but the Hecleus AI. As it turns out, the AI in this area was not nearly as aggressive as it should have been, and part of that happened for a very good reason, which I will get into here in just a moment. But at least when I was starting out here, I had hopes that this was going to turn into a pretty challenging campaign. Like I said, not only because we're a minor faction, and we do not start out with a major settlement, but also, of course, the fact that the climate is working against us. Now, my starting strategy for this one was pretty straightforward. We had one potential enemy just to the north of us who has the major settlements for the provinces where we start out with the minor settlements. So obviously that is a strong priority to make them our first enemy. We're also surrounded by ogres, but the ogre climate regions are not particularly, I should say the ogre region climates are not particularly good for us either. So I wasn't in any particular hurry to go to war with the ogres, but at the very least, even though the climate is not great here in these major settlements, at least it allows us to finish off our starting provinces. Now, if you are not really familiar with what it would be like starting out with a whole bunch of settlements that are in your unsuitable climate, there's a couple of really important things to think about. Everything is more expensive, but also you get a public order hit as a result of it, and takes longer to build your buildings and things like that. So it actually is a significant challenge to have to overcome when you're starting out with a bunch of regions, or in this case, a handful of regions that are not a very good climate for you. And the public order does indeed turn out to be really significant in this campaign, although not as much as it was with the Skaven in the Old World campaign mod example that I did from a few days ago. Now, the starting offensive against our neighbors here to the north, this is kind of where I wish that I had been using a more aggressive AI. These are the guests of the Raja here. This is a Southern Realms faction. Anyway, they were not very aggressive towards us, and even after I declared war on them, they did not do a particularly good job at defending their major settlements. So we roll up and we do go ahead and lay siege to them. I go ahead and bring a secondary army up as well, and I'm very curious over that first turn, end turn, whether or not they're going to counterattack us. They don't, which gives us the opportunity to then go ahead and fight the siege battle and to take our very first major settlement. It is, of course, probably my least favorite walled city layout. It's the one where it's really not very well designed. Well, I shouldn't say the one. It's one of many that's not very well designed, but this one is particularly so poorly designed that there's multiple ways to attack it, where there aren't even any defensive towers that the enemy can bring to bear. Now, I didn't really worry about that, partly because just because, you know, it's sort of the principle behind it is I don't like that there's no towers to defend one side, but also just because we have overwhelming forces here. So I went ahead and attacked from a side where we would at least have towers shooting at us, which does mean that we're going to take some casualties in the process of fighting this battle, but no big deal. That's what fighting walled city battles are supposed to be all about. We do ultimately wear them down, and I'm able to take this city from them, of course, occupy it, get a little bit of experience, a couple of skill points for our characters, very much needed. Every little bit counts a lot when you're starting out in a brand new campaign where you've stacked up the challenges against yourself. And of course, as always, we get that massive debuff to our public order and population growth and replenishment from the slower expansion and settlement supply lines mod. So that's what this 5 here next to the Temple of Gilgridresh is all about, and the massive minus 41 to public order. So obviously we're going to be fighting rebellion here very, very soon. What this does, again, is it just slows down your ability to steamroll, because you basically have to conquer a settlement and then take a minute to breathe, take a minute to either get the public order under control or go ahead and allow a rebellion to happen and fight off the rebellion, and, you know, give yourselves a little bit of time for things to stabilize before you can move on to the next settlement. Now, that AI was not particularly aggressive towards us, but here we are on turn 8, and The AI does get pretty aggressive towards each other, which, quite frankly, is a little bit refreshing because too often I end up finding campaigns where everybody declares war on me as the player because of anti-player bias, but they don't ever declare war on each other. So that's not the case here. Thankfully, quite a few of our neighbors start going to war with each other, so it makes this little corner of the world actually feel somewhat alive. But at the same time, it doesn't really add a whole lot of extra challenge to us. And at this point, I'm already starting to realize, okay, I've got things under control here a little bit faster than I expected. Yes, we're going to have rebellions, but I'm not really being pushed very hard by the AI, so I have time to fight the rebellions and still kind of convalesce my troops enough for the next big push. And very slowly, because everything is more expensive and takes longer than it does when you have suitable climates, we do still manage to slowly build up the infrastructure in our settlements. And at this point, I'm paying very close attention to the ogres because, yes, we're, I think, winning our war against the Southern Realms faction that we declared war on and stole one of their cities from them, but I'm not really in good shape to be able to fight off a bunch of ogre attacks if those ogre factions decided to suddenly go to war with us. Well, I'll go ahead and give you a little bit of foreshadowing. I need not have worried. So, of course, chase down the rebel armies whenever they break out, which does happen a few times, although, again, not as much as it did in that Skaven campaign on the Old World campaign mod. But often enough that it does continue to just be a thorn in our side and slow down our expansion. And also, of course, the reduced replenishment has a pretty profound effect on us as well. So our armies are definitely not recovering as quickly as they do in vanilla, which is a good thing as far as I'm concerned. And after doing a little bit more fighting and things stabilize in our newly acquired provincial capital, I'm now able to go ahead and push the offensive on here to the second provincial capital. Go ahead and combine some of our armies as we lay siege here. The same old really bad siege map all over again, and of course the same results where we do ultimately take it. At this point we're getting a pretty decent number of slaves, so that's a good thing for us. The slaves become really important in a campaign like this because we are able to use our diktats to improve our public order, without which I almost never would have been able to expand much at all because we're constantly in danger of our public order creeping down to the rebellion level. But those diktats burn 200 slaves at a time, but they do give us a pretty profound bump to our public order, so that's really the only thing that allows us to make any progress in this campaign. And at this point, with 2 full provinces under our belt and an enemy that has been weakened pretty considerably, and none of our other neighbors have declared war on us, I'm starting to feel like, okay, maybe this one has not been as much of a challenge as what I was hoping it would be. But, it's still fun, and I'm still really enjoying exploring the world here of Immortal Empires Expanded, so obviously we're going to keep going with it. Now, I wanted to go ahead and show an example here of one of the many times that we fought these rebels, and this is sort of a flaw in the whole Cathay part of the world, and obviously down here in Ind as well, with all these rivers, and the fact that retreating is kind of broken in this game. I was going to complain about this a little bit and just say I really wish CA would fix this. So yeah, we fight this rebel army, and we do beat them, but they do have some units survive, and as we force them to retreat, this is what I mean by the retreating feels kind of broken in this game. It could be more of just how it is displayed to you as the player, however. So what this looks like is it looks like we've got the enemy army pinned with their backs to the river, and then as they try to retreat, it looks like they are able to just retreat straight through our army, all the way around, all the way up to this bridge and all the way around on land to the other side of the river from where they started. But it sure looks like they marched an awful long way to get there. And in fact, they're so far away that even though we barely moved to attack them to begin with, they're so far away that we actually cannot pursue them and hit them again in the same turn. So it feels bad when this happens. However, I said I was going to complain about it, and I thought about it a little bit, and actually what I'm going to kind of do is use my imagination here and say, all right, so these rats in their panic, they scrambled across the river, right? Because that can sometimes happen when it's a matter of life and death and you're completely panicking. You can probably move faster than an organized army that's chasing you. So what they did is they scrambled across the river as quickly as they could. And in order for us to maintain our cohesive structure as an army, we can't do that. So instead, we march around the long way, and that's why we're not able to reach them. So, it doesn't feel great when it happens to you, but at least I think you can kind of justify it by thinking about it like that. What it does mean, of course, though, is functionally it's a bit of an annoyance that we have to keep chasing these rebel armies around all over our territory because, of course, this happens over and over again because there's so many rivers all around us. Now, what we also are able to do is peace out here with our main enemy. Since I've already taken the 2 settlements from them that we really needed to complete our provinces, it felt like, might as well. That's going to now allow me to deal with my rebellions and kind of stabilize things and wait for the debuff, the temporary debuff to wear off from the slower expansion mod. And then who knows, maybe we'll go back to war with them again very, very soon. Now here's what I was really looking forward to, and particularly when I saw that my climate in my starting area was bad for us, I started thinking, well, maybe we'll turn this into a black ark type of a campaign where we're like a dominant naval power with our black arks, and maybe we can migrate to somewhere else in the world. Well, here we are on turn 17, and I finally unlock my first black ark. And what's really nice about the black arks, of course, is that you can stack them up with a bunch of units and pay massively reduced upkeep costs for them, which is kind of important considering we really are not in great shape economically speaking. Again, largely because the climate's not very good. So this allows us to basically build up some military strength and not have to pay the full amount that you would have to with your armies. And of course, black arks have some limitations. They can't move inlands, of course, so there are constraints in a campaign where you're using lots of black arks, but that's one of the things I really like about the Dark Elves is, it ends up making your campaigns get a sort of a different kind of a feel. Meanwhile, I'm contemplating which of these ogre factions do we want to go to war with first, because now that we've pieced out with our Southern Realms neighbor to the north, maybe this is a good time for us to expand into some of the ogre territory. But the game does have other ideas, which I will show you in just a moment. Now, the Skaven are attacking our former enemies, and because they end up raising this Matterdam settlement here, and they leave it as ruins instead of occupying it, I actually come up here and go ahead and colonize it myself. But it's not really a region that I particularly want. So having spent a little bit of money to colonize it, I then turn around and trade the settlement to the snake biters, which is one of our ogre kingdom's neighbors here. And we get a nice non-aggression pact and a trade agreement and a military access agreement, as well as some money in return. In fact, a lot more money than what we spent to colonize it to begin with. So pretty good trade-off as far as I'm concerned. And we now don't have to worry about at least one of our ogre neighbors declaring war on us. But then happens the event that completely changes this campaign for me and makes it from what I thought was going to be a pretty challenging campaign overall into a quite relaxing one. And that is that we get an unusual location down here in Vrindavanis. And that location is, of course, an ogre mercenary camp. This, of course, just like many of the unusual locations, has a bunch of different effects, but the one that really matters to us is the plus 100 relations with ogre kingdoms. And since we are literally surrounded by ogre kingdoms, this all of a sudden changes the strategic picture for us quite dramatically. I no longer, because of this, have to worry about these ogres declaring war on us. Instead, we basically, at our whim, can make friends with them. And basically, we've got a completely secure border now because, like I said, we're surrounded by ogres. We no longer have to worry about any of our neighbors attacking us. And that really makes for a completely different dynamic to your campaign. It's what, like I said, changes a campaign from being a bit of a real challenge into quite a relaxing campaign. At this point, we can kind of pick and choose our battles or kind of pick and choose our enemies moving forward. There is one Skaven faction that's floating around here, and they do get it in their heads to declare war on us, but because they don't really have an easy way to come and attack us, and it is a major settlement that is really the closest settlement that would be vulnerable to attack from them, I really wasn't too worried about this. Now, we're not very long after the unusual location, Ogre Mercenary Camp, popped up, and we're already able to very quickly start making trade agreements with the ogres, and of course that's just the first step towards eventual alliance. The Skaven finally get around to invading our territory, but it's not really a problem. Like I said, it's a major settlement that is the first one that they would come to, and we just hide one of our armies close by in ambush stance. We're not actually going to ambush them, but we just want to stay hidden long enough for them to be lured down into our territory close enough for us to attack them in circumstances that are advantageous to us. But before we are able to, they decide to come down and bring a second army, go ahead and attack our settlement garrison here, and because it's a walled city and because they're Skaven and we're dark elves, we're stronger than they are even when they attack. So again, another example of where I wish I had used an AI mod that maybe alters the logic here, because they basically are foolishly wasting their armies attacking our walled city. And then of course my army that was in ambush stance remaining hidden can now just roll forward and wipe out the remainder of their armies. Very easy peasy lemon squeezy here, and just like that, the Skaven are pretty much nullified as a threat. After all this fighting, we finally get to unlock a name of power here for one of our masters. We end up getting Hydra Blood, which is one of my favorites. It gives us the passive ability of regeneration. So yeah, it's been slow, but as you can see, we're feeling pretty good about ourselves at this point in the campaign. No real substantial things to worry about. And it's been a little bit of a expand at our own pace, whatever is comfortable for us. And as I alluded to, at this point we're able to pretty much give ourselves alliances with all of the ogres all around us, just to make us that much more secure. I even start declaring war on the enemies that they were already fighting, just to kind of speed things along, and also just to make sure that we have some enemies to fight in this campaign. And then because slaves are so valuable to us, and because our diplomatic relations with them are going to allow us to get away with it, I naturally go ahead and just start raiding our closest ogre allies' territory for the money and the slaves. Why not? And with that extra money, we're able to go ahead and start recruiting in some death hags. So at this point, we're starting to stock up our armies with all of our different heroes. For the most part, what I tend to do with a lot of these buildings is I build them just to unlock recruiting the heroes, and then I turn around, demolish them again, and build the next one and do the same thing. That way we've got all of the different heroes, even though we're technically over capacity for them. And when the time is right, I have my first black ark filled up with enough military units that we can go ahead and launch a surprise attack on the dwarfs up here. Why not? They're dwarfs, we're dark elves, they hate us, we hate them. And it's a good opportunity for us to start getting some more battles in, get a little bit of experience and loot out of it, get some more slaves, of course, and, punish the dwarfs in the process. As often as possible, I prefer to fight the battles against the dwarfs manually, even when it's fairly lopsided, just because the dwarfs do overperform so much in auto-resolve, and because we are using War of Attrition, which has reduced replenishment rates and things like that, you really want to try to limit the amount of casualties that you take in battles. And of course, fighting battles is my favorite part of the game anyway, so it had been a little while since I had fought one, so felt good to go in and kill a bunch of stunties. But for the most part, we're really letting our ogre allies do almost all of the fighting for us. They're doing a fine job of it. They're reasonably strong, and we help out a little bit here and there. But for the most part, they're expanding here on this little peninsula or subcontinent of Ind. And that's fine because, again, I'm starting to look for some better areas for us to expand to. Continuing to raid their territory while I'm at it, of course, while I'm moving my black arks down towards this new territory to the south of us. We've got an island here to the south of us where there actually is some good climate for us to expand into. There's some warriors of chaos that are down here currently occupying it. Shouldn't be too much of a problem, but that's going to then move us into the next stage of this campaign. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video there. Don't know whether folks would be interested in seeing any more about this video or about this campaign, because usually the ones that are more relaxing and not particularly challenging end up not performing as well. But I thought it would be kind of interesting to go ahead and show this. It does show an example of what it's like to play as one of these minor factions down here in Ind. And you really do start out with some real challenges that is fun in the early going to try to overcome them. However, in this particular case, like I said, it ultimately was not nearly as challenging as I was hoping for because of that Ogre mercenary camp, which just completely changed the dynamic of the diplomacy down here in this area and really made it a relaxing campaign because we stopped having to worry about being invaded. We're not quite to turn 50 yet, and obviously we haven't expanded very far, but like I said, that large part of that was by choice because there's not really any great climates very close to us. But like I said, now moving down here to the south onto this island, we'll start to finally do some expanding in earnest. And I think with our multiple black arcs at this point, the world is our oyster. We should be able to just keep dominating, moving forward, and just focusing on taking the territories where we do have a suitable climate for us. So anyway, hopefully this was mildly interesting. Again, apologies for it not being nearly as challenging as the previous one was, but I have to say, I really like the the Immortal Empires Expanded mod because it does give you a little bit of that sense of grandiosity that you get from the Old World campaign, but it does so without the incredibly long end turns that the Old World campaign mod does give you. Now, I really like that, and if you have the time and the patience to deal with those really long end turns, that is obviously a much more impressive, big campaign. But this one is a nice step up from vanilla, that's for sure. So anyway, I'll go ahead and leave it at that, but do let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know if you have any questions or comments or anything like that. Let me know if you have any recommendations for other types of factions using the Immortal Empires Expanded mod. I'd be happy to try some others out, but that's going to do it for me for this one. Thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys in the next video.